Hey everybody, this is Grant Kemp with CreativeCashFlow.com, here alongside Propelio.com with the Propelio Academy, showing you guys a lot of different cool strategies, a lot of different ways to make money in real estate. And right now we're going to talk about Subject to. This is a really cool strategy that I like a lot, that I've used a lot over the years, and has just so many moving parts to it, but you really need to understand the core basics of it and understand a lot of what goes into it to be able to do this successfully. Subject to is short for the phrase, I'm going to buy your house subject to the underlying mortgage staying in place as is, okay? Subject to is not an assumption. An assumption would say, okay, seller, I will buy your house. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Wells Fargo where your mortgage is, and then you're going to sit in front of a banker at Wells Fargo and you're going to say, I would like you to take John Seller's name off of this mortgage and put my name on this mortgage. That's an assumption. You're buying the house, you're having their name removed and your name put onto the mortgage. That's not what Subject to is. Subject to says that you are going to buy the house, take title to the property, but you're going to just continue making payments on their mortgage as it is. You're going to leave it completely alone. It's going to stay just as is with their name on it at their bank still. It's basically taking over on payments. However, I don't want you to say taking over on payments to your seller, because saying taking over on payments a lot of times can imply an assumption, right? They might get the impression that they no longer have any kind of responsibilities on that mortgage, and we don't want to give that impression because that's not true. Their name remaining on it does affect them. They do still ultimately have responsibility, even though you're making payments on their behalf. That's the phrase I want you to use, is they're going to make payments on your seller's behalf, okay? This is also not a lease option. Lease options, you don't take title to the property immediately on a lease option. A lease option, you've got to do something before title switches over. That might be payments, that might be some other kind of action. But on Subject to, you buy the house and you become the owner of it immediately. Title, you go to the title company, you go to the attorney's office, title comes over to you immediately. But you're leaving that mortgage in place as is and continuing to make payments on that mortgage. Also, this is an acquisition model. Subject to is an acquisition model. Now, if you are selling with Subject to, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. Similarly, if you're buying with a wrap, you're paying way too much money. So watch the wraparound video so that you kind of understand the differences here, but Subject to is a way for you to acquire properties. Now, once you've acquired it with Subject to, you can do anything you want with it. A lot of times, I'm going to default here to talking about doing an owner-financed sale. Typically, myself, when I buy with owner financing, I sell with owner financing, right? But you could acquire with Subject to and turn around and rent it, or put it on the market, sell it MLS. Whatever you want to do, you can do. This is an acquisition model for you. Got a question for you now. What makes a deal a deal? What makes a deal a deal? I get all kinds of different answers to that question. Oh, it's I want a 322 brick, and I want it to be built after 1989, and I need it to be in this area and this area. You know what makes a deal is a willing seller. A willing seller makes a deal a deal. If you run into a situation where somebody needs to sell their property, with all these tools in your belt from this video series that you're watching, and being able to know different strategies and different ways to take advantage of a situation, you should be able to buy that house. It's very rare that you have a very willing seller and there's just no deal on the table. It's very rare that pops up. It can, but again, it's rare. But you need to know how to do these, and Subject to is one of the biggest tools that I use to take down properties that other investors have turned away from, okay? I would say 80% of the deals that I've taken down come from somebody who another investor's already looked at it and said it couldn't work for them. Yet I'm turning tons of cash on it, and it's through this model that I'm showing you right now. So what are some advantages of Subject to? Well, because of the lower capital risk in a Subject to transaction, you can do a higher LTV. In other words, we all kind of know that, traditionally speaking, we're looking for that 70-cent deal, that 75% deal, something like that when you're doing cash. And why is that? You've got to have a discount built in to make up for the risk of the cash that you're putting out, right? You don't want to put $70,000 out on a house that's worth $73,000, because then you're not making it back. So, conventional wisdom says, okay, well, if you're putting cash up for a house and you want to do a flip, in order to account for all the risk and all the holding costs, that kind of thing, you want to be in at 70 or 75 cents on the dollar. Well, when you're doing a Subject to property, most of the time you don't have a lot of cash coming out of pocket. You may only have a few $1,000s coming out of that, right? And because of that, you've got a lot less to risk. So this allows you to do a higher LTV, a higher loan to value. You can take over on a property subject to where they own 90% of what it's worth, and you're still going to turn a big profit, and you're still going to get good cash flows. And that's one of the really awesome ways that subject to can come in to help you out. Also, it's built-in, unlimited, non-traditional, non-institutional, non-recourse lending. This is the type of lending that you can do 20 of these a month subject to, and nobody's going to tell you no. Your job is to talk to the seller and get the property that way, right? However, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, I think the total is 8 or 9 that you can do through them. Banks are going to be doing all kinds of digging and approvals and non-approvals. With subject to, you can buy as many properties as you need. You don't have to have big income to prove that you can do these investor loans. You just have to have the ability to sit in front of a seller and talk to them about what's going on and lead them into the situation that you want led into, which is them selling you the property subject to. Again, disposition. Subject to is an acquisition model. Once you've acquired it, you can do anything you want, but subject to is a way to buy properties, okay? It's a fast and cheap way to buy. You can take a property down with subject to quickly. You can close within only a couple of days on this. You're not having to wait on title companies and all that kind of stuff because you don't need a title policy on subject to transactions. Watch our basic understandings video, watch my title policy video to understand why I'm saying you don't need a title policy. I want to put a caveat here. If you feel more comfortable getting title, get title. Do not get title just because I'm saying not to get title. You need to understand why you wouldn't get title. That's a big, long, fancy way of me saying don't blame me if you don't get title and things go wrong, but you do need to know both sides of the coin. I don't buy title policies on my subject to properties, okay? This is something you can close quickly through an attorney's office and get in there and get done, which is great for things like foreclosure properties, something that's got a deadline on it. The first Tuesday of the month here in Texas, we are getting foreclosures to occur. So if a lead comes in on Wednesday before, you don't have time to go get a title policy. Title policies don't turn around that quickly. But you can do a quick title search, do a title run, go through the attorney's office and get things taken care of there. And then you can even get your own homestead this way. Actually, the house that I live in right now, I bought subject to. This was a lead that came across my table. It was a beautiful house and had a great amount of equity in it, but it was just somebody that got caught, behind on payments. And yeah, I had to reach in my pocket and put a substantial amount up to catch it up, but I got into a house where I walked into it with over $100,000 in equity right away, right? So you can find your own homestead through this type of deal as well. And so it's nice to have that in the back of your mind too. Let's talk about commercial versus consumer laws. Now, when you're acquiring with subject to, it's going to fall under commercial law because a consumer law is defined as buying a residence for you to live in. Well, this isn't. When you're purchasing a property for investment, that's not for you to live in. This is an investment. Therefore, it's under commercial law. And the cool thing about commercial law is that commercial law basically allows you to do anything. Commercial law does not have the consumer protections in place that consumer law does, right? To know more about the consumer law, you should watch the Dodd-Frank series so that you understand a little bit more about what is out there for consumers, what the people that are going to be buying it and living in it, what's out there to protect them, because you need to abide by those rules whenever you're in this business and selling it to somebody who's going to live there. But for now, for the acquisition, you don't have to worry about that stuff. So it allows you to get funky. It allows you to do things that you need to do to get the deal done. You can really structure this deal the way that the seller needs it structured in order for you to acquire that property. On that topic of sellers, who is your seller? Well, 90%, 80% of my deals come from investors who have passed by these subject to properties already in their other marketing. And that's because sub to leads are from the same lists that all of your other leads are from. For all of these properties that you're buying, if you're in a situation where you're in a market and the market is not just like rampantly fire hot, you're passing up on 1 or 2 subject to leads for every regular cash deal that you've done. Now, when the market is rampantly fire hot, it becomes harder to find those subject to leads because the people have so much equity that they've got a lot more options of how they can sell the property. But this is still a tool that gets used a lot, something that you need to have ready. But the point here being, all of your normal marketing, that's where you're finding these deals. You've just got to ask the right questions. You've got to be looking for the right situations. Foreclosures are like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, this is one of the biggest areas that you're going to find a subject to lead in, because these are people who they've got to sell and get out of that. And it's much better to have you taking over and paying payments on their behalf than it is for them to have a foreclosure on their record, right? So that's a good motivation. Low to no equity, being able to come in and clean up after other investors. That's another great lead source for you in the subject to world because, again, we can do higher LTVs. I can buy a house at 90, I can buy a house at 100% of value and still turn huge profits off of it because of knowing how to do subject to in these different strategies. Divorce is another area where people are highly motivated, want to get out. That can be a little bit more challenging because obviously you've got to kind of get both people on board with it a lot of times when both are on the mortgage. But it's another area where we run into a bunch of sellers. And then vacant homes. My favorite phrase of, hey, your house is just sitting there costing you money. I can at least take that burden off of you, right? So you can fit in a lot of different lead sources that way. In order to fully understand subject to, first, we need to really understand the traditional bank financing model. So let's take a look at that, okay? So we've got this house, and we've got Joe and Betty, our sellers, and they have an underlying lien. You're going to see me use UL a lot when talking about this stuff. It stands for underlying lien. So they've got an underlying lien to their bank. Then the buyer comes into play. Well, buyer says, hey, seller, I want to buy your bank or buy your house. So the buyer goes to their bank and says, I would like to get a loan to buy seller's house. The bank says, okay, that's cool, we can do that. So then everybody goes under contract, turns that contract into the title company. Title company gets involved, gets everybody to sign over. The sellers are going to sign a warranty deed to the buyer. This is what gives the ownership of that property to that buyer. Okay, watch the basic understandings video so you can understand a little bit more about which documents are going into there with the deed of trust and warranty deed and all that kind of stuff. But the warranty deed gives ownership of that property. Okay. The buyer is then going to sign a mortgage with the bank. They're going to have a note and a deed of trust with that bank. Once that has all been signed, the bank is going to send money to the title company. The title company is going to pay off the underlying lender, and they're going to give whatever the remainder amount is due to the sellers. So what you're left with at that point in time is a buyer who has a warranty deed, which gives them ownership of the property, and a deed of trust and a note, which gives them their mortgage with their bank. What I want you to notice here is that these are three different documents. We have a warranty deed that gives ownership of the property. And then there's the mortgage that says who has the debt on the property, and that's done through the note and deed of trust. So many times, we traditionally feel like, well, whoever owns the house owns the debt, right? But it's different documents that do each of these. And that's exactly what subject to is doing, is we're splitting out the fact that the warranty deed says ownership and the deed of trust and note is who has the mortgage. We're leaving the note and deed of trust in place, and then we're having another warranty deed convey ownership of that property. So if we look back at our example, and we've got the sellers who signed the warranty deed to the buyer has a mortgage with their bank. Well, let's look at this, what it would look like as a subject to transaction. What if the buyer did not go to the bank and get that mortgage? What if the buyer did not get that note and deed of trust, but the buyer instead wanted to take over, buy the house, and then continue to make the payments to that seller's underlying bank? Well, it would look like this. The seller would have a mortgage and a deed of trust still to their underlying lien. This is the original mortgage and deed of trust that they had on their property. The seller is going to give a warranty deed to the buyer, who in this case would be you. The buyer, in return, on this top part of that triangle, gives a deed of trust to secure performance to the seller. So this is the protection that the seller has, because what this says is, hey, I buyer, I investor, am going to buy this house from you. You're going to give me a warranty deed, and in return, I'm going to give you a deed of trust that says if I don't pay your mortgage payments like I said I was going to pay them, you get to foreclose and take this property back from me. So that's how that seller is protected. If you look here on this bottom part of the triangle, the buyer pays the monthly payment on the seller's behalf. But on the right side, we see the mortgage and the deed of trust is still between the seller and the underlying lender, right? And then all the way to the left here, you see that we have possession and ownership of the property because of that warranty deed. That warranty deed gives you possession and ownership of the property, okay? I want to look at this a little bit differently too. That mortgage with the note and deed of trust from the sellers to the underlying lender is in first lien position. When you purchase this property subject to, and you get a warranty deed and you give a deed of trust to secure performance to your seller, that becomes second lien position. It's a subordinate lien. You're making those monthly payments on their behalf, but you have a subordinate lien position They are always in that first lien position. So if you don't make those payments, they can foreclose and get the property back from you, all while making the payments to their underlying mortgage on that first lien. Okay? As you've seen in the basic understandings video, the only thing that matters in lien position is the date and time in which it was filed. That's why the subject to transaction is subordinate to the underlying mortgage that was already there with the sellers, right? So it's important to know where you stand on that, because as you watch the wraparounds video and as you understand a little bit more about what we're doing on the back end to make money with this on owner financing, okay, there's the first lien to the bank, there's the second lien between you and your sellers, and then essentially a third lien going to your end buyer, which means that if they stop paying you, you can foreclose on them and put somebody else. If you stop paying, your seller can foreclose on you and put somebody else. If nobody's paying, the bank gets to foreclose and get everybody out of there. The due on sale clause is going to be really the biggest risk to your seller, really the only risk to your seller in this type of transaction. The due on sale clause is something that's out there, but not something that I think you should be terribly afraid of. In my office, I've seen over 10,000 of these properties go through it with seller financing, and fewer than 10 of them have ever been called with the due on sale clause. But I do have an entire video on the due on sale clause so that you can watch that, understand a little bit more about what the due on sale clause is, and more importantly, what it is not, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And then I also have in the negotiation series, I also have the due on sales clause script for you to talk with your seller about it, a comfortable way to approach this to where you should be able to get past any hurdles that are coming up from it. What is a typical deal on subject to? You know, typically we're looking for that $100,000 to $150,000 house, really down to like $80,000, and that's here in the DFW area. You know, I know that can get you a porta potty if you're in California, and so basically what we're looking at is we're looking for those low to moderate end homes. You know, this is not your war zone. This is not where the president is going to live. It's kind of that Walmart theory of where is the majority of people able to live. That's a decently safe neighborhood, but is not the most expensive, not the cheapest, right? That's kind of where we're at. Typically, somebody's going to be $6,000 to $8,000 behind on their payments whenever they're doing a subject to transaction. And you're typically taking over on a mortgage that's somewhere between 75 and 85% of the value of the home that they owe. Right? So if it's a $100,000 house, they're probably going to have a mortgage for $75,000, $80,000 somewhere in there. And you're usually looking at somewhere between a $12,000 and a $15,000 rehab on these properties to get them fully rehabbed back up. You should always know your rules of thumb, and more importantly, know when to break them. You know, these are kind of what the basic deal is going to look like on a subject to property, but watch the rule of thumbs video, because there is a lot of rules of thumb that I use to evaluate a subject to property, because there's just so many more gears turning on a subject to property than there are on any other kind of acquisition model. So you really need to know what you're getting into right from the start. That being said, there's going to be a lot of keys to success because of all these gears turning. You know, I used to always parrot, oh, you don't have to have any money to do subject to, you don't have to have money to do subject to. And that's true. You don't. I got into this business. I don't come from money. I don't come from anything that resembles money. I grew up comfortable, but we, you know, again, it was nothing. We were in a small little 1,000 square foot house, and my neighbors were the biggest drug dealers I've ever seen. And there were, you know, many nights where my mom would call and say, the helicopter's out, don't come home, right? So I didn't come from money. I didn't have money to get into this business. I was able to build my portfolio using subject to, because it's a business that you can get into with low capital. However, the important thing to keep in mind is that even though it doesn't take any money to get into the deal, you need to have money to maintain that deal. Just so that you're doing the right thing, you've got to have reserves ready that if your end buyer stops paying, you can support the payments on this underlying mortgage for several months to keep things going. The thing that I suggest for that is when you do sell it, if you sell it with like a wraparound mortgage, take that down payment. Don't spend that down payment. Put that aside. Put that into reserves so that you can have that money available if or when your end buyer stops paying, to be able to support the payments that you need on your underlying mortgage. Good contracts are imperative in this type of business. You've really got to have everything, all your P's and Q's and I's dotted and T's crossed and all that kind of stuff. You really got to figure out exactly what's going on this and have a good contract in place. I use Horn & Associates for their contracts. For me, they're just the most secure contracts that I've seen. Honesty, I can't get past, or I can't stress enough how important it is to just be honest with people. Promise what you can do and perform what you promise, okay? And do not overpromise, and don't say something just because you think the seller wants to hear it. you've got to only do what you can do, right? Be honest and upfront about them, and sellers appreciate that. They very much do. And proper disclosure. Our motto is disclose, disclose, disclose. We want to make sure that people understand exactly what's going on when they're getting into this kind of property. One of the questions that you will get when you're doing this is, what if I want to buy another house? This will come from your seller. What if I want to buy another house? I've got this mortgage sitting out here in my name, but I want to get another home. Well, my sellers have had no issues getting another house. Now, again, this is one of those things where we can only speak historically, because I don't know what's going to happen in the future. We could have laws change or whatever. And at the end of the day, it's an underwriter by underwriter decision. Each underwriter is going to handle this differently than the next. But if you're honest about things and you don't overpromise, you'll be fine. Watch the negotiation series to see exactly how to broach this with your seller. But the short of it is, if you can show that you're paying this mortgage and not your seller, most underwriters, at least for what I've seen on the last about 3 years, are not counting any of the subject to mortgage against the seller, right, on their debt to income ratio when that seller is looking for a new mortgage for a new property. If you're able to show even canceled checks or the closing documents or anything that shows, hey, I've been making these payments, not the seller, the new underwriter is like, okay, that makes sense, and they're not counting it. Before that, it used to be where they would handle it kind of like a rental. They would handle, for the first year after your seller sold you the property subject to, for the first year, they would count a third of the monthly payment towards your seller's debt to income ratio. And then after that year, they wouldn't count anything towards the debt to income ratio. So we may end up seeing that again. But for right now, and as it has been for about the last 3 years, as long as we're showing that the seller's not the one paying that payment, the underwriters aren't counting any of it against their debt to income ratio. So once you've acquired subject to, you can rent it, you can flip it, you can owner finance it to another buyer, you can do anything you want. The wraparound video is going to show how you can turn this type of asset into a six-figure income. But I'll give you a quick sneak peek. On a $100,000 house with $80,000 owed that you're taking over subject to, that turns into $142,000 net profits. That's zero repairs or hassles during the income period, and that's $0 out of pocket because you get reimbursed anything that you had to put up front. And then as the bank, when you're doing an owner finance property to somebody else, you don't worry about repairs like you would like a landlord. That's the buyer's job, right? So just your sneak peek before you go and watch that video is you can turn $20,000 worth of equity into about $142,000 worth of net profits. And granted, it's going to take time to get there, and you can factor in time value time value of money and all that kind of good stuff. But even with that factored in, you're making a ton of cash, right? So again, subject to is just a phenomenal way to acquire properties. It allows you to get out there and really make a splash, buy things that other people can't buy, and really find a niche that fits you that other people aren't looking at, because there are a lot of turning gears, and not everybody has the luxury of watching this video series from CreativeCashFlow.com. Not everybody has the luxury of understanding what is and isn't able to be done in this owner financing world. So this gives you the leg up on people. So keep watching these videos, keep learning about it, get out there, pull the trigger, start doing some stuff, start buying these properties. I'd love to hear some success stories from you guys about this. You can always contact me at grant@creativecashflow.com. I get a lot of emails. I can't guarantee that I'll get back to you right away, but I do enjoy hearing your success stories, so let me know. As always, look up Propelio.com, see what they have to offer. I think they've got a lot to offer for you, especially with the Propelio Academy, the forums, and the comps, and just everything that's there to offer is just phenomenal. Find them on Facebook, find them on Twitter, all the social media outlets, and then keep watching these videos and keep on at it, marketing, finding your properties, finding your niche, and until next time, we'll talk to you later.